Everybody in USA Rugby is coming up against a deadline that's important in their Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings, and it's kind of a good time to think about planning ahead and thoughts for the future. And to do that, I wanted to have a look at some financial stuff from the past, all the way back to 2006, because I think it can give us some lessons for how we go forward.
So let's take a look at USA Rugby's budget from 2006 to 2018. And you can see from this first chart that it gets bigger and bigger as time goes on, going from around $5 million in 2006 all the way up to past $15 million, up to $16 million in 2014, and hovering around that amount for the last several years. 2018, USA Rugby's budget was actually somewhere more like $27 million, but we took out the numbers that were related to the Sevens World Cup because that kind of skewed everything else. And that was just sort of a separate one-off event, and we've just sort of put that aside in all our comparisons. We've color-coded everything, so anything that looks a little bit red or orange, that's an expense, and everything that's sort of a softer green or blue, that's an income stream. And as you'll see, that the blue income stream, that's membership, and the red expense stream, which is national teams, are the ones that are the most prominent over time. If we take out the budget total and just look at the expenses and income over the last several years, a couple of things jump out. First of all, blue, very prominent, and that's membership income. Just about every year, membership income is the number one source of income for USA Rugby. Look also at the maroon line, which is supporting services. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's talk about membership first. Let's look at that spike, 2010, 2011. What's that all about? Well, in that period, USA Rugby CEO Nigel Melville hit upon the idea that the territories and local area unions were soaking up dues that weren't going to USA Rugby. And he felt that if he eliminated many of the things that those unions did, including all-star tournaments, and then took it upon USA Rugby, they could collect the dues, and the dues would go up a little bit for members, but really not very much. It would just be more going to USA Rugby. You notice that it worked. If we isolate out membership and sponsorship, a couple of other things jump out. First of all, look at there, the bottom left, 2006, how low the sponsorship money was. It was about $200 and something thousand, in fact. And that was the main problem going on in USA Rugby in 2006. National team head coach Tom Billups stepped down largely because he didn't believe that USA Rugby had the income available to cover a decent-sized budget for his team. He had budgeted for a smaller budget. He was told the money was there. As you can see from sponsorship, it wasn't there. What happened after Billups stepped down was that World Rugby stepped in and upped their grant amount, and USA Rugby changed their policies to allow dues money to go to the national team. Eventually, the sponsorship money picked up, and we can have a look at another big year here, which was 2008, 2009. 2008 was the one year in this whole time where sponsorship money outstripped membership money, and that was perhaps Nigel Melville's biggest coup as CEO, the National Guard sponsorship. National Guard sponsored USA Rugby for essentially 2 years, 2008, 2009. This was a great sponsorship for USA Rugby. Teams got free kit. There was a lot of money changing hands. Right around 2008, of course, there was a change in the White House. Barack Obama won the election in 2008. George W. Bush was out, and you went from an administration that was prosecuting 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to an administration that was trying not to prosecute those wars and try to draw back. The result was less money for recruiting for National Guard. National Guard sponsorship went away. Did USA Rugby have anything backing that up? A little bit, but you see there's a dramatic drop in sponsorship dollars relative to the budget for USA Rugby, and they really haven't ever made it up to that level. They've made it. So let's look at the expenses, and the thing that jumps out at us here is that maroon line, supporting services. Now, supporting services sort of goes under the same line item as the national office, but we separated those out because we wanted to track whether the national office was spending too much money for itself. But as it turned out, really it was this nebulous term, supporting services. And what is supporting services? Well, it is mostly to do with Rugby International Marketing, the for-profit arm of USA Rugby that became USA Rugby Partners. It is expenses that USA Rugby is incurring because of the existence of Rugby International Marketing. But let's go back to that chart talking about sponsorship, because Rugby International Marketing and USA Rugby Partners is supposed to be bringing in the majority of the sponsorship. The level of sponsorship for USA Rugby hasn't changed over time. The expenses related to how much money is going out to support this effort have increased dramatically, but the sponsorship level hasn't changed at all. So essentially what we're doing is paying people to get credit for something that was happening already. The money USA Rugby brings in has generally been then from membership and sometimes from sponsorship. And if you look at this time lapse showing a pie chart of where the money comes from to the organization, have a look at that yellow wedge, that's membership, and the green wedge, sponsorship. And again, only 2008 is sponsorship larger than membership. Every other year, sometimes dramatically so, membership still is the biggest income producer. Going forward, USA Rugby is going to have to figure out a way to fund some of their initiatives without having to depend on that membership money, because that membership money, for the most part, is going to be going to satellite organizations.
So ultimately, for me, there have been a few surprises here. I've tried not to go into this examination with any preconceived notions, but I had a couple of them. And I came away a little bit surprised, for example, in generally how regular World Rugby grants were. That surprised me a little bit. And in general, for a while, the slow movement of membership dues, especially as it pertains to being a percentage of USA Rugby's budget. But what I also think all of this tells us is something I touched on when I talked about USA Rugby events, is that it's okay to think big. Thinking big is great, and getting a big payoff is a great thing. But we learned back a million years ago when the USA Men's National Team had a $1 million a year deal with B-Sky B, that when that went away, certain people were just not prepared to make up for it. And when the National Guard sponsorship went away after 2009, they weren't really prepared to, again, fill in that gap. So filling in those gaps underneath the really big sponsorship deals, that's an important part of the puzzle. Another thing going forward is, and I talked about this with events, it's really good to make a big event huge and profitable and successful. But the small events still have to pay for their supper, basically. And if you just ignore them, you can start to lose money in little bits and pieces throughout time. So this is a lesson not just for USA Rugby, the national office. This is also a lesson for the smaller organizations that are going to be spinning off. The youth and high school, club, college, referees, is they have to think about that income ticking over and those expenses that can tick over and start to escalate. And while there can be a big sponsorship or some kind of big payoff, you also have to worry about the little things.